Previously on Inside Criminal Minds, Morgan's skepticism for Gideon's return, Hotch's having to profile Gideon for the top brass, and now the thrilling conclusion to the Adrian Bale character arc. Wait, hold up. If you're new to this channel and you have no idea what I'm talking about, there's a link in the description with a playlist of all of the previous videos. It'll catch you up on this episode. Thank you, and if you're not new, enjoy the rest of the video. So this episode starts with two men having an argument about what we later find out is real estate. And that's when a literal bomb goes off. One of the men gets badly injured, whereas the other man gets away relatively unscathed. We then cut to the inside of the BAU. Hodge and Gideon are both discussing this new case. And this is where JJ starts to get her feet wet as being part of the team, being the media liaison for the BAU. She's tracking the news of the explosions, and due to the fact that this unsub is a bomber, Morgan has some second thoughts about going with the team to Florida due to Gideon's failure in Boston, which Hotchner starts to stop Morgan from profiling Gideon because he wants the team to be focused on catching the unsub and not profiling each other, which also in turn makes an unwritten rule of not profiling your teammates. And on the plane, they decide to use a trope that I'm not very happy about. They start talking about bombers, and each character adds their 2 cents to bombers, and it makes no sense because if all of these people are experts in the behavioral analysis unit, why do they need to keep telling each other how to profile bombers? And that's when we cut to them going to the previous crime scene by doing a green screen fade into the crime scene. And again, they start putting out facts and figures about bombers, and they assume since the only person to live from one of these bombs is the one who was badly injured and in the hospital, they believe that he is the unsub. So they get a warrant and go over to the guy's house. In the meanwhile, Garcia shows up with Morgan to look at the bomb fragments. And in this episode, they use Garcia's inexperience to teach us how they use bomb fragments to create a bomb and profile the bomb from what the bomb is made out of, how it's made, and other things. And in this episode, it really shows the chemistry between Garcia and Morgan. In the process of searching the house, they find bomb-making materials and the anarchist cookbook in the garage with bomb-making materials, such as pipes. And that's when Gideon talks to the victim and determines that he is not the unsub due to his answers to the question, which really shows his skill of not only profiling the bad guys, he's also good at profiling civilians. Going back to the house, Elle finds a picture of their nephew and determines that the nephew most likely was blowing things up, and that's why they had the bomb making materials, showing her that she is a pretty effective profiler and is learning how to be better as a profiler. And next we see Garcia playing Tetris while talking to Morgan rebuilding the bomb. Morgan finishes the bomb, except for he's missing 1 or 2 extra pieces. And so Garcia uses her knowledge of Tetris to explain to him that there might have been a rod inside of it, which triggers Morgan to remember the bomb from Adrian Bale. But unfortunately, we know he's not the unsub because Adrian Bale is currently serving time in prison. And also this scene does a great job of explaining what a signature is to the audience and also to Garcia, again, as she's less experienced. Next, Gideon tells the cop that he will go and interview Bale while your team is looking for the person who fits the profile, which triggers Gideon into delivering the profile to the police department. And again, it shows a very good scene of the green screen swap into a crowded restaurant and a guy who is very apologetic, even though it wasn't his fault for bumping into somebody. And it does a great job of not only profiling this unsub, but also other types of bomb makers. Which brings us to a scene where one of the top brass is leaning on Hotch to, if we needed to make a deal with Bale, that we were in a position to do that. It feels a little weird because Bale had killed FBI agents and countless other people, but then Gideon starts to interrogate Bale, and the chess game kind of begins with Bale, and they go back and forth with Bale bragging about how smart he is, and Gideon trying to feed into his narcissism to get the information that they need. And also, Bale talks about how his profile is kind of a classic sense of him not being able to be a different person. And Adrian Bale reveals something to Gideon that is foreshadowing for the end of the episode. But because Adrian Bale didn't give any specifics about the bombings, Gideon knows that Adrian isn't part of the unsub's plan. However, now that Adrian Bale knows that there's a copycat bomber out there, he will try to reach out. And so Gideon goes back to Florida, whereas Reed stays behind to find anything about Bale's outside fans. And another great scene from JJ happens where she's explaining on the news how this unsub is leaving his bombs by using the profile from Adrian Bale, brown boxes with blue lettering on the white sticker. And so a family who's about to get ready for school, work, what have you, finds one of the packages, and luckily enough, they find out that it's a bomb before it does go off. And when the bomb disposal techs show up, the mom stays with her little girl, which foreshadows a scene in a future episode called Empty Planet, and we'll get back to that when we get there, of somebody who is not necessarily supposed to be in the danger, decides to stay there to help the potential victim cope emotionally. And so while Reed is still in the prison, he finds out that Adrian Bale has been using the internet. And so Garcia sends Adrian Bale a Trojan horse to get a keylogger onto his computer, which they find out that he is a pervert watching porn, but also that he is on a website for naughty hobbies, which is basically a bomb making forum. And so they use that forum to find a pool of potential unsubs. And so Reed and Gideon start talking, and Reed goes through all of the different occupations that are on the site, and one of them sticks out to Gideon as an antiquities dealer. And meanwhile, Elle is going to a guy named David Walker's house due to the fact that he is an antiquities dealer who was talking to one of the victims about, but as soon as Elle shows up and gets talking to the wife, Hotchner calls and tells her that Walker is the unsub due to the previous scene with Reed and Gideon. And this is where Elle gets her first real big trauma in the story. She does start to get more traumatic scenes later on in the series. And again, we'll get to that when we get to it. This is when Hotchner shows up and they take a look at Walker's workshop and find not only bomb-making materials, but also a shrine to Gideon's failure, but also Adrian Bale. And this is when they find out the motive of Walker was to shut up somebody who could potentially out him as a forger, and he would go to prison for years forging things like documents, coins, especially since they find electroplating materials in his workshop. Next, we have a guy showing up to the police station with a bomb vest on. He says that the unsub sent him in here and is now needing to get certain things as a ransom, and then he will defuse the bomb for the FBI. Unfortunately, they can't give him what he wants, so because Walker has threatened to blow up this victim if he leaves the police precinct. They know that the unsub has to be somewhere in the buildings around it. After bringing the SWAT team and a sniper, they find out where he's located at, and Hotch and Elle both go to infiltrate. As they're interrogating Walker, Morgan finds an email from Adrian Bale to David Walker saying that if they find you, don't let them keep you, which triggers Gideon to think that Walker will blow everybody up, and in true Hollywood fashion, Gideon calls Hotchner with enough time to get everybody out, but now nobody can defuse this bomb except for Adrian Bale. And this is where the chess game gets into its final moves with Gideon and Adrian Bale, with Adrian wanting to get out of a maximum security prison and into a mental facility, and also getting the written confession of Gideon's guilt, which gives Adrian Bale a sense of pride because he outfoxed one of the smartest FBI agents, and not only does he want it in writing, but he also wants Gideon to say it out loud, which again serves to his narcissism that I'm better than you and I want you to admit your faults. And so they get down to the last two wires, which is a very weird thing to do. Honestly, and this happens in every single bomb defusing scene, and that is, do we cut the blue wire or do we cut the red wire? So Adrian says, cut the red wire, and Gideon remembers in the past interrogation that if he was going to push that button again, he would do it every single time. So Gideon, instead of cutting the red wire, he cuts the blue wire, saving the victim and also voiding the contract with Adrian Bale. And that's when he goes back to the prison to see Adrian Bale being locked back up, and as a checkmate to Adrian Bale, Gideon tells the other inmates how willing he was to cooperate with law enforcement. This episode did a really good job of establishing a connection between Morgan and Garcia, and also did a really good job of closing the book of Adrian Bale's trauma, because Gideon was in a post-traumatic stress disorder state since the failure in Boston. That's all I've got for today. If you enjoyed the content, please like, share, and subscribe.